continuous improvement. And so if you think you know the best way to do something, then you don't keep improving. So we don't use the term best practice. It's a good pattern. We also see things which you probably shouldn't be doing. We think of those as anti-patterns. And so there's a lot of concepts in DevOps theory which, every DevOps journey is unique. And DevOps is a journey. DevOps is not a destination. And so the idea that we can use this understanding and learning and continually improve by understanding different patterns, different anti-patterns to move forward, learn from other people's experiences. But if every journey is unique, then maybe not every pattern applies to every organisation. And similarly, maybe not every anti-pattern applies to every organisation. So with that said, I'm going to take us through a range of patterns and anti-patterns, and I'm going to ask our guests what they think, whether we can do these things in the real world. So I'm just going to take a seat. There's plenty of room over here. If the podium gets in your way over here, we're all going to be sitting down. But I'm going to move over here now and say welcome to my panelists. Hi guys. So let's start with empowered developers. This is the idea that developers are the new kingmakers. Stephen O'Grady of Redmonk said that a couple of years ago. Developers are making decisions about developing how they, and they're making decisions about operations to a degree. How is my infrastructure meant to support my application? So I guess I'll start right here with Dan. What do you think? Empowered developers, is that a thing?
I do think it is a thing, but I think there are a number of caveats that need to be thought through before empowering developers to make business decisions, technical decisions, and operational decisions. I think there needs to be a type of personality that you bring into an organization. These are individuals that do not mind being collaborative, which is key to DevOps adoption. They have an understanding, at least at a very high level, of process. They also have a belief of offering feedback on specific angles and process that is taking place in DevOps. So it's possible, but you need the right mix of people and talent.
Yeah, I think it's pretty true. Any thoughts, Dan, Himanshu?
Yeah, I agree with Dan there. And I mean, it's kind of like you can empower some developers, but maybe some other developers shouldn't be empowered. You have to make sure that they have the right perspective and that they're willing to listen to feedback and absorb things from the operations side and from the business side. Because I mean, anti-pattern, or at least trend that I've seen, is that people take the empowered developers thing too far, and you're starting to have decisions that are being made in a vacuum. So as Dan said, you really have to have that collaborative spirit to make sure that you're not just taking over decisions that you shouldn't be making.
Good point. Himanshu, anything to add there?
Sure. What I think is, in terms of what developers are adopting, if you look at patterns like service-oriented architecture and microservices, it's really having an impact on the operation side as well. Because now operation needs to be able to catch up on their side as well. The way they were running operations previously may not necessarily work well with these newer development patterns. So there's a whole theme of playing catch up to development.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's move on. There's quite a lot coming. It's going to be sort of a quick fire. Continuous everything. Himanshu, let's stay with you for a moment. So we have these ideas of continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment, continuous configuration, continuous security, continuous everything, right?
Pretty much.
Can we do that? Is that even possible these days?
I think it is. In terms of how we look at continuous integration processes, it's really now across the board. It's not just development, not just operation, it's QA, it's InfoSec, it's every team in between. And the tooling itself is evolving to catch up with that, as well as what we increasingly see and we are helping our customers do is also the teams themselves to adapt to these new trends. So when we now design a CI pipeline or CD pipeline, we always kind of raise the question that how do we also integrate QA and InfoSec into this process?
Yeah, and that's really important. Charles, do you have anything to say on that? Because I know the idea of integrating security, QA, other teams, network, these sorts of things. Charles, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in this overall term. I mean, one of my favorite things is to take your entire test suite and also have a way to run it constantly against your production environment. Because that really means you can catch anything that goes wrong. So you have test users and you have that kind of thing that are constantly logged in, created, registered, unregistered. At that point, you can have as much confidence in your production environment as you have in any of your staging or other environments. So that's one of the favorite things we do for our customers.
Excellent, yeah. Okay, systems thinking. This is an interesting one. The idea that DevOps introduces this notion that you need to know the entire system. You can't just be a programmer working on this line of code. You have to know how that code is being used. You have to know why that code is being asked for. So it's connecting the whole system from the business desire and need all the way to the customer and delivery. Especially in a larger organisation, I've certainly seen that to be problematic. I mean, Dan, have you seen people, are there systems people and non-systems people, or is that something that everyone can do?
I think everyone can do it, but I do believe it requires some foresight, some thought, and some definition as to what is the actual system that we're trying to build. Like in our organization, we use technology such as Trello, and we use Waffle to define not just what the business objective is that we're trying to accomplish with, say, a particular customer's project or with a specific software delivery, and then use Waffle as, if you will, our product requirements documentation. This is what the use case is, this is the problem statement, this is our, if you will, our test plan, this is everything that we need to encompass in order to have our engineers with end-to-end visibility as to what the business problem is, the operational problem, and then the technical problem that we're trying to solve. So it's possible again, but it requires some upfront establishment of what the goals are.
I mean, one of the things about DevOps that I find kind of entertaining is that almost half of it is not so much introducing new processes, but undoing problematic processes. You know, you have
Garbage in, garbage out.
Right, exactly. You have the kind of siloing and victims, especially in large enterprises, and it's caused people to just focus in on their part of the problem. A lot of the reason why people aren't thinking in systematic ways because they're trying to avoid blame. They're trying to make it somebody else's problem. And so there's a whole cultural aspect to systems thinking where you have to get a bunch of people who are often used to like passing blame back and forth to start to collaborate, and then once you undo all that siloing, then a lot of the technical things just naturally begin to happen.
Yeah, the whole blame game thing is a very non-DevOps. It's a DevOps anti-pattern, right? The idea of blaming everyone and this sort of thing.
Yeah, pretty much. In terms of breaking down the silos, I think we talked about like how some of the tooling is evolving with that, and what we're increasingly seeing with our customers is there's now increased belief that even if you're on the engineering side of things, you should have some level of visibility in terms of how you're contributing value at the business level. So you're not just working in your own silo on the engineering side, but also you can see how it contributes towards the overall goals of the business. And from the business side as well, they have visibility in terms of how the development teams and operation teams and every other teams are contributing towards the overall goals.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I sometimes do workshops, and one of the first questions I ask is for everyone to write down on a post-it note what is, you know, in a simple sentence, what is their business goal? And then on another one, how do they contribute to that goal? And it's amazing how many people don't know what the business goal is and don't really understand how they contribute to it.
Yeah. And it's really, I mean, it's really important to us too. When as a startup we're being very lean and trying to be as efficient as possible with our development resources, but also doing just enough to prove out our product feature or definition with a particular customer. And for our developers to understand how they're actually going to be contributing to that win or furthering their product, it's almost a galvanizing experience for them, for the organization.
Yeah, and that's where you get the real empowerment from that.
Yeah.
The feeling of contribution.
Yeah, that's true too. Okay, let's grab another. Oh, 2 pizza teams. Everyone enjoyed lunch, I hope. The idea of a 2 pizza team, I think this originally came from Amazon. The idea that any team to deliver a specific capability you should be able to feed them with just 2 pizzas. This is the idea of how many people can you interact with, how many people can you efficiently work with, and how big a release should you ever actually be working on. So, 2 pizza teams? Is that reasonable?
With quantifying it exactly at the 2 pizza level, I think that's a tricky topic. But in terms of doing frequent releases and smaller releases, I think that's a universal theme that everyone can agree on. And then that also impacts everything from how you approach your agile development process, where you're trying to build more systems and components rather than big monoliths. I think that's the way I look at this whole 2 pizza thing, rather than maybe necessarily dictating the exact size or quantifying the size of the team.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I can eat a pizza myself. I mean, maybe Charles, you and I are a team.
Too, yeah. I like this as a heuristic. I mean, I think that like very large team sizes are often themselves a size of dysfunction. And again, it can have to do with fiefdoms and trying to collect as many people under you at once as you can. And it does lead to smaller, more incremental delivery. So yeah, I think I'm a fan of this. There's some places where you have to have a larger team. If you're working on, I don't know, a NASA launched satellite or something like that, that's a must. But for most projects, 2 weeks is a good heuristic.
We at Dell, we were part of a software organization that was intended to be very innovative, which actually we were in delivering cloud and big data solutions to market. And so with our DevOps team, as it grew over time from 5 people to 40 to 50 to 60 people, it became a challenge just to finish our sprint retrospective in 2 days. So what we needed to do, of course, we attacked the problem in 2 different ways. One, we split off cloud and big data technology and software development groups, so they had their own sprints and agile functions. But what we also did, furthermore, was break down, as we're using Rally at the time, and breaking down the individual product scope, who's part of this, and they would have their own, if you will, mini sprints and mini retrospectives. And they were doing their fiery fists to death for making sure that everybody's happy or unhappy, and resolve, because that's a cultural thing. Resolve that strife in a very small group, so you're not, if you will, spoiling the entire DevOps group. So we were successful in that. A good one.
Okay, what else we got here? Design for failure. This is an interesting one. And you mentioned NASA, right? Not everything maybe you can design for failure. And this is reflecting the idea of fail fast, fail small, fail cheap. Do little things so you can tolerate failure. This is not about intentionally failing, which some people say, design for failure, that's crazy. This is about making systems resilient so that if failures happen, and I will say when failures happen, and we see this with cloud services in particular, the idea that you need to make sure to understand that this service will fail somehow, somewhere, and you need to be resilient to it. Dan, I'll stay with you for a moment. Design for failure, is that something that you take on board? Do your customers take that on board? Is that something that you're seeing?
Yes, we are seeing that. For example, we're working with a prospect today in which they deliver networking solutions to their customers. And one of the things that's key for them to identify in their development and test process is the interoperability challenges that they will run into when deploying their technologies on site. So it's not necessarily a software development issue, it's more around the functional test and unit test. How is my software technology that obviously is delivering networking capabilities to their customers, how does it interoperate with various clouds, physical infrastructure? So they want to understand what those potential failures are before they actually see those failures in the field. So it's a critical part. Absolutely.
What I've seen, I like this term, or I like the idea behind this term. I've seen when you're talking about designing for different pieces of the application to fail, or the infrastructure relies on to fail, like that's a critical discipline. I've seen this misinterpreted as design so that when a failure occurs, it's incredibly big and obvious. And that, I would say, is an anti-pattern. People will misunderstand it to do that. You want that kind of thing to potentially happen early in the development phase, but you do need, your production system shouldn't just fail utterly if something minor is wrong. I've seen it misinterpreted that way. So,
Okay. So I assume we all understand different methods of programming: agile, lean, or planning even, Scrum, Kanban, extreme programming. Himanshu, I guess I'll start with you on this one. I mean, are these all the things? You do them all together? Do you pick one? What's best?
The way I look at these patterns is these are guidelines. In the real world, what I find is teams are on a gradient where they lean towards certain guidelines, but they are not at absolutes. So if you look at, let's say, Scrum and the benefits of Scrum, it's you find most teams are moving towards a Scrum-like model rather than a puristic model. And I think the business needs to accept that as a reality. They make the best out of it rather than necessarily trying to move towards more Puritan model.
Yeah, and I think that's actually one thing to take away from all of this is that, I said before that DevOps is a journey, and you need to, what was those books where you were a kid, choose your own adventure, right?
Yep.
You don't necessarily do everything, you choose your own part, the thing that's going to work for you, yeah, makes sense. Charles, agile land band. There you go. There's a new one for you. Lean Kanban. Okay, that's now a thing, and I'm
better go
probably-
register it right away. I mean, I think the fees are all, you need to pull from each of them like it's a toolbox, as you said. But one of the problems that we see with adopting these new methodologies is the requirement to get everybody in the room and just beat on a problem in a meeting for a long time. And I find that to be really counterproductive. I think there's a lot of people who need to think on their own for a while and then present something that they thought about. And in a meeting where you're trying to like force consensus, some of the smarter voices will get pushed down. I mean, you know, if you have an excellent Scrum Master, you know, you can get around that kind of problem. But often if you have an excellent Scrum Master, you're going to succeed no matter what you do. Because you have that one unicorn person who can like bridge development and business concerns. So, I mean, we are currently working on kind of a next level of tools to facilitate an agile-like process, but that doesn't require so much face time, works better with distributed teams, and really works more with like concrete results, and less with getting to consensus at a verbal level, because there are so many ways that can backfire. So.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's really interesting. I find that really interesting also from a diversity perspective. You know, you talk about some people are more willing to speak up and be the vocal person in a Scrum team, but other people are maybe not, trying to get the good ideas, especially out of different minorities and so forth, who maybe aren't used to being that leading person in that room.
You also have the distributed team problem, right? Because whoever is calling into a Scrum or any kind of meeting on the phone is essentially, you know, not going to ever own the room, and
Yes.
so I mean, those kinds of the requirement of Agile to get everybody in the room, including business people who also have a day job that's separate from delivering software, you know, that is an aspect of it that really needs to be worked on. Like, we need to find processes that don't have that as a central piece of their requirement. So,
What else we got here? Agile for infrastructure. So Agile, obviously a coding methodology. Agile for infrastructure is a way of translating those theories into infrastructure and configuration and provisioning and so forth, so that when you're ready to release, you're ready to release infrastructure as well as release code, so that you've got these fully functional units of work. You know, that seems to be relatively straightforward in the cloud with automation tools, you know, chefs and puppets and Ansibles and stuff like that. Outside the cloud, I wonder if that's actually that easy. I don't know. Dan, is that, how do you look at Agile for infrastructure?
Well, that's what my company does, so we think it's very easy.
There you go.
But the problem, I think, is taking all this infrastructure and making sure that software or code you develop works in an integrated fashion with the infrastructure. But understanding that your infrastructure will grow, it'll change. There'll also be added, there are different security models that you need to be concerned about. There are also going to be different business drivers you need to be concerned about, whether it be cost or dealing with different types of customers. So we kind of view how all of this technology needs to work together, not just as the first iteration of deployment, but an ongoing way as needing to be composable. Meaning that, okay, if I start out and in my chef cookbook, I have steps 1 through 100 on how to instantiate an environment. But when I go to upgrade or scale, my step 1 may become irrelevant, and my step 20 now becomes step 1. But in my upgrade, my step 10 now needs to be step 2, or step 12 now needs to be step 46. So I think the point is that you need to be very composable and have an orchestrated approach in how you're actually delivering infrastructure so that it's just as agile as your software development and implementation.
Any thoughts on that, Charles?
I find this one kind of dangerous. You know, I tend to think in terms of like how things are going to be maintained 5 years, 10 years down the line. And sometimes Agile for infrastructure can be taken as an excuse to put a really half-baked, not very well thought out service in production and have people start relying on it. And especially if you don't have like proper monitoring to figure out who it is who's relying on this service that you just rolled out, then you can end up in a situation that we've seen before where it's like the thing has been sitting there for a long time, we're not sure who's using it, and the way we're going to find out is by pulling the plug and see who complains.
Yeah, been there, done that, got the phone calls.
Obviously, yes, exactly, right, obviously it's not a dysfunction. But yeah, when this is used as an excuse to skip planning that should be done, then it could be dangerous.
I think the internal DevOps Cloud and how agile that aspect of it is a good way to measure how ready the organization is to adopt this philosophy overall. Because we see that this as one of the biggest challenges. Because as a process improvement expert, when you go into an organization and you allocate all of these new tools, technology, and processes, what you find is the business might be trailing behind in terms of being ready for that. So I think fixing that is the first major step before going all the way through.
Yeah, so in some ways it could be an anti-pattern, but obviously if you work with Dan and rack in, then it's a pattern. Good. Oh, I love this one, the wall of confusion. This is one of the early concepts in DevOps. This, I think, might be Damon Edwards came up. I can't remember who actually came up with this one, but the idea that there's a wall between dev and ops, and that wall creates confusion. This is the old way. This is an anti-pattern. The idea that developers would just throw code over the wall, and operations would have to grab it and go, well, what am I meant to do with this? And conversely, the operations would the code comes over the wall, and operations would just throw it back and go, nope, this is not ready for release now. I need to do work. So collaboration, communication, integration. This is a DevOps pattern. The wall of confusion is the anti-pattern. Dan, is this breaking down? Are we getting to the point where we're getting rid of the wall of confusion, or is it still a problem?
I think it's still a problem, because I don't believe having every single organization that philosophy that's willing to embrace DevOps. And I don't think it's necessarily a prejudice against DevOps. I just don't think people have the time. IT staff, as we all have seen in our worlds, they're overworked. They're dealing with problems, new technologies, new rollouts that they need to deal with, and it's just a matter of commitment. But where does that commitment come from? It comes from understanding what a successful pattern would look like. It comes from leadership. It comes from socializing how DevOps can make your job better, easier, get a better pay scale, raise and such. So it's still there. I think it's improving, but it's still wrong.
Go ahead. I mean, it's definitely improving, but I would say it's gone, far from gone.
How do you help break it down? I mean, Charles, do you have any thoughts on how you get rid of the wall of confusion?
Very incrementally. I mean, especially if you're
going time.
Right, yeah. If you're going into a larger organization that you have the fiefdoms and siloing and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you can start with really small steps, like let's make it so that the developers have more access to the production environment so that they can see diagnostics and all that kind of thing, which often they have to request by way of another team, and that's obviously going to slow everything down. Likewise, sometimes you find development organizations where they don't want anybody from ops to be able to see into the source repository or something like that. There's a lot of people over on the ops side who would be able to go in and actually troubleshoot things down and say, I think it's coming from here, And if you just start with small steps like that, then you can begin to get a kind of natural collaboration, because the people who are the most ops-minded on the development side and who are the most development-minded on the ops side will just start talking to each other, and then you get that pipeline turns into a wider and wider pipeline of communication, and it gets better and better.
And add to that, recently we were on a project where we implemented the visibility of some of the operational logs in the development team. So some performance metrics was, we created a dashboard where the development team could instantly access and see the impact of the releases. They could see that, okay, this particular release may have had an adverse effect on the operational side of things. And that alone made a huge difference. Setting that up itself was not that difficult because of the availability of a lot of open source tooling around this. But the value add was great from something like this.
Yeah, excellent. No, I totally understand that. That's, by the way, something that Splunk does, so maybe we can talk about that later.
Sure.
DevSecOps, DevQAOps. I'm actually giving a session at the Splunk User Conference in September, which, if I can recall, the session is called Biz Plan Dev QA DBA NetSec Ops Biz. Yeah, something like that, right? Because this is the idea that DevOps doesn't start with dev and doesn't end with ops. There's a lot of other components in the middle. There's, especially in larger enterprises, you've got DBAs and security, network staff, you've got a QA, testing, and if you're systems thinking, then you've got to have all of this involved. Is this something that's possible? Can people do that? Charles, you're nodding vigorously. Jump in.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think especially with Dev QA ops, we really focus on making that as possible as it can be. Starting with test-driven development, building the tests early, and making sure that the tests can also be run against your other environments, so that the entire thing is continuous from a QA perspective. And also, this is another place where you have like a potential siloing problem, especially when you have like an external or outsourced QA operation. Sorry, excuse me. Voice is getting worse and worse, but so when you write up a test plan, then just that's another wall of confusion between development and QA. I don't think that in the DevOps mindset you can realistically have a totally separate QA team. I think it really has to either be a function of development or be a specialization within development. And the old school too of writing up test plans needs to mostly be replaced by like actual functioning tests. Otherwise, that aspect of DevOps is not really achievable.
Yeah. So in terms of SecOps, that's an area that we've been doing some interesting work recently with some of our clients. With security right now, there's a lot of open source tooling out there, which both attackers and defenders can use effectively. One example is this tool called SQLmat, which is an open source tool that can be used for testing SQL injection vulnerabilities. And one of our recent projects, we added that as part of a post-deployment step, where after the web application is deployed to an environment, you point SQLmat toward that environment and run these barrage of tests, which is maintained actually by the open source community. And you're getting the benefits of a tooling that could potentially be used by an attacker once you ship this to production, or you have the option to test this early on and make it part of your standard process.
Yeah, I like it.
So a lot of other interesting tooling can be used in a similar manner.
What else have we got on the list here? Oh, tribal knowledge. So tribal knowledge is stuff that one person in the tribe knows, or a couple of people in the tribe know. And it's arcane knowledge, it's unique to them, it's in their heads. It makes them really important, it turns them into heroes. And that's another anti-pattern in the DevOps literature, if you will. The idea that no one should be a hero, because a hero is doing superhuman effort, and what you really want to do is go home and spend time with your family, not work till 9 o'clock at night, not come in at 3 o'clock in the morning and solve all the problems. If you've got someone who's being a hero in your organization, then it probably indicates that you've got fundamental problems in how you're organizing your teams and how you're working together and how important, how big a release is and things like this. So you end up with this tribal knowledge. So tribal knowledge is an anti-pattern. Dan, what do you think about tribal knowledge? Can we get rid of that? Is that a good thing to get rid of?
There's 3 ways to get rid of tribal knowledge. One is to almost forcefully, and that's a terrible term to use in DevOps philosophy, document everything. Put what's being done in the code, in your wikis, in your readmes, publish it, whatever tool or technology they're using. For these types of people, in your stand-ups or your retrospectives, you're bringing it to the attention, like, hey, we had a grenade diver do this because of these reasons. And you're almost calling that person out, not in an embarrassing way, but you're identifying this as a behavior that is unacceptable to the tribe, to the team. And the third thing is, you kind of have a personal decision to make. Is this a pattern that is going to be uncorrectable? Is this person going to continue to try to be the glory hound, if you will, the grenade diver? If that's the case, well, then this person maybe need to move out of the organization. Or they come around and say, okay, I'll stop doing that.
Yeah. Tribal knowledge?
I like that term, grenade diver.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I think one of the most simple and concrete ways to avoid the tribal knowledge problem is just that if you ever find yourself writing a long email, then you should be putting it on a wiki or into documentation instead. Because what happens is you end up with people who were in the organization at a particular time saw some seminal email, and then new people who are added on don't see it, and then you have a horrible pattern of, oh, didn't you get this email? Let me forward it to you. And so it's just buried again for the next time. So there's that, just anytime you find yourself writing a long email, put it in the documentation instead. The other thing that we use, I call it the trip over principle. You want to put the information somewhere where the person who needs it can't help but trip over it. So we put a lot more information right into our source code than most organizations do, because you're there and you're looking at a particular line of code and you're wondering what the purpose is. And if there's a document right there in line that's explaining the design thinking behind it, that's really the best place for that to be, as opposed to being complete shelfware on a shelf somewhere, some big huge tome that nobody will ever read. So yeah, being able to trip over it, at least a pointer to the information right in the midst of performing a task is critical.
I like that term too, the trip over. Yeah.
Exactly. And adding to that, the whole idea of also adding documentation here, the source code is great. And even if you're using tools like Puppet Chef or Ansible, you have the basic README within the repository itself, so that next time you need to reprovision the environment, the knowledge is right there.
Yeah. And that's where things like, we started off earlier on with empowered developers. If you let developers make their own decisions about everything, to your point, Dan, some of this might be a bit contentious in the DevOps mode where you've got empowered developers, yet you need them to write documentation. And most developers I know, not that keen to write documentation. So you really do have to make sure that certain things happen in process that maybe are, not what everyone wants to do. What else have we got? We go test-driven development. This is really interesting. I find this fascinating. The idea that you write the test before you write the code, and then you write the code to pass the test. The idea being that you don't deviate, you don't get out of scope issues, you're understanding exactly what you want to do. It's like when you were at school, at university, or whatever, you do the exam, you ask the teacher, teacher, is this on the exam? Because that's what you want to study for. You don't want to study for other stuff. You want to pass the test. So, Himanshu, I'll stay with you for a moment. Test-driven development, is that working for you? Do you use that? Do your customers do that?
In terms of our customers, again, we don't find many things following the Puritan model where you must write tests before you write the code. What I think is really practical is to aim for a decent test coverage. So you have the tooling to measure the test coverage. And then you also not just have the traditional unit tests, but you also integrate more functional tests, more integration tests, and then also not exclude things like database. That's one of the forgotten areas of automated tests in the old CI pipeline. But in terms of the model itself, I think we rarely come across things that follow that to the T.
I actually don't like this term. I think what works a lot better is more like documentation-driven development. So, it used to be called literate programming, and it's a great discipline. When you go to write a test and you're writing like actual code that will exercise the API, you're not necessarily, as compared to writing documentation, like when you're writing documentation, you're thinking about how you're going to convey the functionality to another human. And you're thinking about what the person needs to know in order to use whatever it is you're building. And it tends to immediately make you see edge cases that you have to explain or exception conditions and that kind of stuff. That works a lot better than a test-driven development where you're writing just a single use case as opposed to trying to describe the general usage of it. So I find that like as you said, you definitely need to get there and build the test suite, but I think that the first thing to do when you're designing anything is essentially to use the process of writing documentation to try to explain it to someone else, and that gets the right cognitive processes going.
Yeah, and I like that as well. It's part of this is the idea of using exactly what you need to do, documented well, maybe pre-defined tests to prevent waste in the system. This is a topic that I'm really interested in, the idea of introducing waste into your development process. So Mary and Tom Poppendike wrote about this at some point. If you look on the web, the 7 wastes of software development, and it's fascinating. I think, and gold plating is one of those wastes. The idea that you add features that weren't necessarily in the original documentation or in the original user request, because I think someone might like this. It's like, well, that makes it bigger, slower to release, maybe more prone to error, and ultimately no one asked for it. There's a waste in your system. The good documentation up front, literate programming.
Literate, it's interesting. Yeah. That's my favorite.
Literary programming. So sometimes reading William S. Burroughs is like reading code, but anyway. Okay, Dan, anything to add on that? On the test-driven development?
I just want a small thought. I think with test-driven development, would be very much challenged if you have a lean business. Because what you're trying to do, because you don't want to slow yourself up by writing test plans. You want to just get product out to market. You want to validate your use case, how your customer persona, and validate that you're actually going to make money on whatever you're developing. While you certainly want to make sure that whatever you get to market has been tested at some point, the fear is that you're going to spend so much time in writing up your test suites, unit test, functional test, that you're going to be slow to market. So it's just more of a cautionary.
So you need balance as well. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's another aspect there, is that sometimes your tests and the perceived value of your whole automated testing suite can be so high that it prevents large changes. So in other words, you're too afraid to change something because you have thousands of tests that would be invalidated by a different architecture or something like that. So you have to be a little bit careful with test-driven development, again, that you're producing too many tests, or that you're testing with the wrong layers. We try to test as close to the actual user experience as possible, because that's the part that you don't want to break, and that's the part that you don't want to change. And then you need unit tests as well, but a lot of the sort of middle layer integration tests we've seen in some organizations just produce huge amounts of tests in that area, and that actually freezes the design of the software and stops it from evolving.
Good. Excellent. Okay, moving on. Oh, empathy and respect. This is really interesting. Now, DevOps is about people, right? There's the three-legged stool: people, process, technology. But primarily, DevOps is a journey around people. It's around culture and empathy, respect. I saw a really good presentation from Jeff Sussman a couple of years ago, right here in DevOps Summit, New York, around empathy as a core function in DevOps. There's obviously a lot more to DevOps than just empathy. I can feel your pain and still not do good work. Himanshu, is that enough? What else is, in terms of the DevOps as culture, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think empathy is a big thing, because at the end of the day, DevOps should empower culture and help the business value overall. With practices like retrospectives, which were traditionally followed by development teams, but now increasingly we are seeing even operations participating in these kind of practices, where there's this way to look back at what went wrong and how do we prevent this from happening, whether it's adding some automation or just realizing the core issue and taking steps to prevent that in the future. But having that environment as a whole needs to be important.
I think a big one is trust.
Yeah.
And it's on a multitude of layers. There's trust in the directive that's being pushed, by leadership to adopt DevOps as a philosophy. There's trust in, once you've kind of figured it out, there's trust in the process working. There's trust that you're not going to be hammered by a coworker if you have a great idea. There's trust that, okay, if you're a developer, you have trust that, whoever's doing the testing, doing the deployment, doing your Scrum Master, providing the feedback loops, that you're getting the honest feedback and not just, a blow of hot air. So, with that, I could trust her.
I think it's really important.
There's kind of a related anti-pattern here, which is that we will see some organizations that are trying to adopt DevOps start by hiring or promoting somebody to be the DevOps czar, which is sort of like exactly the wrong thing to do, right? It's like you're supposed to be
King of DevOps.
Right, yeah, and anything I say must be done for DevOps reasons. You're trying to create a feeling of teamwork between operations and dev, or dev and QA. You're trying to make it so that they aren't siloed. When you have that one person who's just saying, you work together, or whatever you imagine as this person's role, we've never seen that work. It usually just creates more contentious problems. And so, I think again, you really need to start with like the most operations-minded developers and the most development-minded operations people, and get them to start talking, collaborating in small ways, and that's how you begin the DevOps process.
I'd like to drill down a little bit on that, actually. It's something that was actually in the abstract for this panel. Is DevOps a role? You say, the director of DevOps, or the VP of DevOps, or update your LinkedIn to be a DevOps engineer. Is that a thing?
It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. That can be a traditional step, a transitional step, maybe. Again, it's dangerous to hire anybody or have anybody be the DevOps czar. Of course, you're going to see this as a discipline all over people's LinkedIn resumes, just from like a self-marketing perspective, right? So it's going to be there. But yeah, ideally, however the philosophy is introduced into the organization, it has to be like every single person is thinking that way. It can't be that there are particular people who are in charge of that way of building things. It has to be down to the last man. So,
Dan, have you seen DevOps as a role, as a team, as a title? Have you seen that at all? Have you seen that work?
Oh, as a title, yes, but you know, as we was kind of talking about, I mean, you can have an individual who's well versed in all the DevOps tools and processes and procedures that go along with having a successful DevOps organization. But if this person is a authoritative, we do it this way or no way, then that's not the type of person you want in this organization. You want somebody that's going to be a shepherd, somebody that's going to be very consultative, somebody that's very collaborative, that's almost a coach, a teacher, because that's the type of person that's going to drive trust, they're going to drive empathy, they're going to drive respect. Look to this person as someone that, hey, I'm not quite sure how to deal with this person, or I'm not sure if this unit test is going to be accepted by them because this guy's a jerk, or DJ tired, I don't know who he is. That's that person that's going to be that facilitator of collaboration in making a very cohesive unit.
those are just the right words, like guru, teacher, coach.
Yeah. Shepherd, I like shepherd.
Yeah, shepherd, yeah.
Yeah, I would say one of the classical mistakes and patterns we see regarding this topic is a lot of traditional operation teams are now being renamed to DevOps.
Yes.
Like we're changing some of the tool set, we're migrating it off to some new shiny tools, and we are going to rename the team and maybe even the job title from operations to DevOps. So that alone does not classify as DevOps.
Or last week it was the digital team, this week's the DevOps team, next week's the transformation team, right?
Right. Exactly. I mean, a lot of times, at the high level management, like they think the problem is solved. Oh, I hired somebody for DevOps, so now we have DevOps.
Yeah.
Check.
Like organizations operating like that, which
Yeah.
is just sad.
Yeah. The other thing I've seen is DevOps project. There's an anti-pattern for you. We've got a DevOps project right now. Yeah, we're due for completion in 3 months.
Are we going to use DevOps on the DevOps project?
I don't want to go back to waterfall and start today.
Yeah, once the project's done. Yeah. Just a couple of minutes left. Talking of which, collaboration and communication. That's an interesting one, I find. I think it's really, really important to your point of having gurus and having coaches and so forth. Yeah, this is very much a core part of DevOps. But Charles, you actually mentioned distributed teams too. Collaborate. Do you have distributed teams? Do you see that? How do you do collaboration and communication in the real world?
I mean, the thing is that there are a lot of fancy tools out there. There's things like Slack and that kind of thing, which tend to capture all the conversations so that they're not just lost. But a lot of it is just not being afraid to use email and wikis and all that kind of stuff, because there's nothing wrong with those tools. In many cases, we don't. I mean, when we started, this is 15 years ago, we just basically started doing DevOps, and nobody had the term for it. And then, long time later, suddenly the term was introduced, and we were just kind of like, oh, you want to call what we do DevOps? Okay, now it's DevOps. So, I mean, it was certainly quite possible to do it with basic tools like emails and wikis and that kind of thing. And the other thing is just, automating a lot of that communication helps too. So, like, for instance, every time somebody checks in a change or something like that, and the test suite should automatically run, and then all the relevant parties should get notifications of any kind of failure, especially if it's in their area, that kind of thing. So, that level of just automated communication also helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
ChatOps is definitely one of those emerging areas that's really helpful to reduce some of the notification overload that teams are seeing. Because now with multiple tools, you have multiple tools that might be sending out a lot of email notifications, or you need to go to 10 different tools to get the overall status of where things are. But with ChatOps, what you can do is you can pipe the notification, not necessarily all of the notifications, but the more actionable ones. So don't send out bill notifications for every bill. You send out the ones that are for failing bills or for failing deployments. The team chat room is a common room where you not only have workers, but you also have operations, QA, InfoSec, and everyone in the same place. So those are definitely very helpful.
I think ChatOps is a really hot topic at the moment. I would recommend people have a look at ChatOps for Dummies. A mate of mine, Jason Hand, out where I live in Boulder, Colorado, put that together, a short course. ChatOps, I think, is really going to be very powerful, already is. Just not much time to go, I'm going to jump forward What do we want to talk about? Shift left. Oh, self-organizing teams. I did want to touch on self-organizing teams. Again, part of the cultural aspect of DevOps. Dan, self-organizing teams, is that something that you've seen? Are you doing, your customers?
Well, we did it at Dell, and we've also done it within our startup. But the major caveat here is that, you know, with our organization, which isn't a huge one, we understand the philosophical benefits of DevOps. We know the tools, we know the collaboration that's required. So from that perspective, you know, we know how it works, whether it's, you know, by, you know, for a team that hasn't had this type of exposure and has burned their feet more times than what we have in you know, building up this process. It's questionable if it will be, you know, successful. You just can't take a book and read it. You need to kind of live it and expand it as you move on.
I think we're over time, so I'm just going to fill the rest of the slide out. Some DevOps patterns and anti-patterns for you all to consider. Himanshu, where can people find you if they want to find you and learn more about what you do and what your business is?
So I'm on Twitter. My Twitter handle is 0xhimanshu and Addteq.com. Which is what Addteq does.
Excellent, excellent. Charles?
I'm at smartclient.com, and you can actually get me in. It's just Charles.
Brilliant. And Dan?
Yeah, Twitter, DanC8871. Dan at Rackin.com. Rackin.com is our website. And our open source project is rebar.digital.
Beautiful. Dan, Charles, Himanshu, thank you so much for appearing on the panel at DevOps Summit 2016 New York. Thank you. Thank you.